Good morning, Revolution, everyone, and welcome to the show. We've got such an incredible panel lined up today to discuss what the heck is going on with the media these days. We've got not one, but two editors from People's World. We've got Chauncey and CJ who are joining us, as well as Marcia, who has also worked in journalism for, I think it was about 22 years, and then went on to teach media theory and media literacy at the university level. And so today we're going to be talking about how difficult it can be to try and find our bearings in this new kind of world that we're coming into when the media seems so bought and sold. But before we start, I think that we all want to extend our solidarity to the more than 180,000 people who have been displaced in the Los Angeles area because of these forest fires. I guess they're like fire tornadoes or something now at 90 mile an hour winds, blowing fires into places. Chauncey, I know that you're in the Los Angeles area. Could you quickly share with us a little bit of what's been going on with you personally?
Well, I can go overall. I live in Los Angeles, and I am close to the Sunset Fire that broke out on Wednesday, some blocks away from that one, and was have our to-go bag ready. Still, actually, because the winds are might pick back up today, but yeah, it's been very chaotic. The Palisades fire is probably the biggest one, and mostly because of the really I would say historic winds that happened starting on, I believe, Tuesday, where the fire broke out, and essentially because of the winds being as strong as they weren't able to do um, airdrops of the water from the planes. So that allowed it to, with the winds grow massively. And yeah, we've had a number of fires that have broke out since then, and along with power outages and power outages, trees falling, things like that. The biggest thing so far that's, been grabbing the news as much has been the fires and the devastation they've been causing in various places. For myself, it was about Wednesday early evening when a lot of people here have been paying attention to the app Watch Duty, which is something we pay attention to for the fires, and where we got the notification that we were possibly going to need to evacuate if they hadn't gotten it under control. Fortunately, on Wednesday, that was when some of the winds had started to die down, so they were able to actually do water drops of from the air. So that was able to keep the Sunset Fire under wraps to the point where it didn't burn nearly as many acres, but it was touch and go for most of the evening, to the point where eventually it was just spot fires. But yeah, it was one of those things where, and for many, like in the Palisades fire, the Kenneth fire, and others, it was one of those situations where some people only had minutes before they could leave. But there's been I think a lot of coming together as well. People have been there's the animal shelters, the shelters for people, things like that, people reaching out to try to volunteer, to be willing to take in animals that are displaced, extending their homes, or at least help, free foods been given out, things like that. But of course, there's gonna have to be an evaluation and of how the response and what was causing the fires. But we also have been dealing with a drought for some time, so there's the question of the climate, the science that, of course, online they try to make political in the sense of denying it, and basically, you know uh people on the right tending to uh very much try to weaponize what this devastation is bringing right now as some sort of failure of the liberal California or whatnot. But really, what it is a devastating natural event, but also fueled by climate change. But also, you had the situation where people were not mincing words, where they talked about the fact that some people who had had their homes for years basically would have were saying that they recently got rejected for fire insurance, and then this happened. So that's another story that's coming out where, and we've seen this in other states as well, Florida and others, when it comes to like hurricane and tornado insurance, where the insurance companies are basically leaving people high and dry in places where they're most vulnerable. So I think California is no exception to that, in particular with the fires and with us earthquakes as well. So yeah, we're still in the thick of it a bit, and we're because the Santa Ana winds are supposed to come back next week as well. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, we really, really appreciate you tuning in and sharing your perspectives on the media with us when literally, the world around you is kind of on fire. But I think it's an important thing to mention that there has been just like a tremendous amount of disinformation floating around about these fires. Not just lots of different people pointing fingers at individuals, but then also I'm seeing some really weird like AI driven stuff about there being like roving gangs of homeless people like setting these fires, and people, vigilantes and looting and stuff like that. And it just seems really scary. And I think it kind of like, you know, leads us into our topic today. And how is it that we can get reliable information in this day and age of all this new kind of media, right? Social media, but then also the fact that it's sort of owned by an increasingly smaller number of people and an increasingly smaller number of concerns that are driven by profit. I mean, the insurance industry doesn't look very good this year or last year or the year before, but this recent cycle, it seems as though the insurance industry is really showing how not helpful it is for most people. So, but Chauncey, I know that you spent a lot of time last year covering the election. And I also know that you spend a lot of time looking at, popular media and also news media. And so I was wondering how, considering the fact that most of the news media in the United States today is owned by 6 different corporations, how do you think this was reflected in the coverage of the election? Not just the network media, but also, let's say, Elon Musk's Twitter or Mark Zuckerberg's Facebook and Instagram. Did you see that kind of centralization of news under billionaires play out in the narratives around the election at all?
Well, I think, what we saw um, during the election cycle and whatnot, even with like the news publications in particular, you had, and we have been seeing this leading up to as well, where you had these billionaires and millionaires buying and owning these mainstream or corporate publications, and essentially under the guise of like benevolence and helping journalism and whatnot. And then when push came to shove, they essentially taper down on the speech of their journalists and their staff. We saw that with Jeff Bezos's, I believe it's Washington Post, where he stood in the way of an endorsement of, I believe, Harris, and then L.A. Times in particular over here, that mm, owner of that publication, who's a millionaire and whatnot, has been stifling editorial pieces and pushing this idea that if you have an editorial that seems to not favor Trump, then there absolutely has to be a article on the other side that shows a different perspective. So, pushing this both sidesism. And I think what we're seeing with that is those who are wanting to cozy up with the incoming uh, president-elect Donald Trump, and and they were already kind of setting the basis for that. I believe the LA Times owner wanted to be in the cabinet of the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where them using their influence to either censor uh the questioning of certain things, or in the case of people like Elon Musk or Zuckerberg and the other social media platforms, more so with the laissez-faire kind of way that they've been wanting to do moderation and community notes, and relying on citizen journalists and things like that. It's more so putting out so much so-called information to the point where it dilutes uh how people get their actual facts,
Right.
and how people get their information, which can be very hard because education and people being educated on the issues is one of the key ways they're able to vote better. And if as Elon had put it, with Twitter at the time being the town square of the world, or the United States at least, that was a big thing of him wanting to control it, because he wanted to control the narrative and the discussions. And part of that was injecting this chaos into it, to the point where people would have a harder time siphoning out um, information that could actually be used for empowering, versus the disinformation that we've seen around. And Facebook has been doing that for some years now,
Mhm.
and been guilty of doing that for some years now as well.
Mhm. Yeah, I heard that there's a term for it called flooding the zone, where you have so
Mm.
much disinformation out there that then you can't really like parse what it is that's actually true. And I'm really looking forward. I hear that, Chauncey, you've got an article coming out today in People's World that actually covers a lot of the material that we'll be discussing on the show. So I look forward to reading that once it's posted up. Marcia, when once the election was actually called for Trump, you all of the sudden saw this like mass kind of capitulation, not just with the Justice Department, which I think we also covered in People's World, but with the media, the news media. You had people like Joe Scarborough on MSNBC who almost immediately rolled over. You have Mark Zuckerberg, who is contributing $1 million to the Trump inauguration fund and goes on television in almost this like self-abasing, humiliating position to say like, oh, I want us to have free speech again, etc. Wanting to change his moderation policy. What gives? Why was there this sudden like roll over? I mean, you could even see it in the Times, where you have people, they're publishing articles about how, well, maybe Trump won't be so bad, or maybe we can work with Trump on this, that, or the other thing. I mean, the media were calling him fascist. Not all of them, but there were voices that were saying, hey, this guy is really bad news for the United States. And now it seems as though I'm reading op-eds that say, like, maybe it's a good idea if the United States takes control of Greenland. So what is going on here, Marcia? Why is it that the media just sort of flipped like this?
Okay, it's really simple. I think it was James Carville who started this. It's the economy, stupid. In this situation, it's money, stupid. Everybody recognizes the power dynamic that is existing now with the election over, and they're scared. They're like, oh my gosh, all of them. See, the thing about consolidation is that everybody has put all their eggs in the media basket. And so the minute Trump gets in, then, well, okay, he's going after the media. All your eggs are going to go everywhere. You're not going to have anything basically that you can call your own, nothing that you can say, this is my position, or even young, the regular common folk people are really kind of um, worried about saying anything to their neighbors because of fear of retribution. And that's very clear. Trump said a long time ago, he said he was going to get back at his enemies. And so now everybody wants to make sure that they're his friends.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. And I remember back when the Washington Post and the LA Times sort of refused an endorsement, people were calling them cowards, right? They were saying, "Oh, look, they're capitulating to Trump," and "Oh, Mark Zuckerberg, he's capitulating to Trump," and Elon Musk also capitulating to Trump. But CJ, is the tail wagging the dog here? Like, who's actually in control? Is it the MAGA forces in government, or is it these billionaires who have basically enabled him through their media apparatus to take power again through flooding the zone or putting their finger on the scale one way or the other? Who is really in control here, CJ? Is it Trump or is it these billionaire media people?
Well, there's a certain synergy between the two, right? And sometimes people on the left, Marxists, we're always looking for what are the economic roots? What's the superstructure? What's the big picture here? Where is capital using its power to control outcomes? And I think what we're seeing right now in a lot of the dynamics that both Chauncey and Marshall were talking about, this rolling over of a lot of media people and CEOs in other sectors too. It's not just media, but we're seeing this play out in a lot of places. It's almost a sort of visiting the Vatican dynamic, right? These people are showing up to kiss the ring and pledge their loyalty in a way. And it's taking the form of contributions to inauguration funds. It's taking the form of lawsuit payouts by some of the big media companies to Trump to sort of sweep under the rug. Let's sort of start fresh, right? Because during his first term, the relationship between some of these media companies and President Trump was quite rocky. But I think we're seeing is that, a lot of the leading lights of the capitalist class, as much as they know they control the system, when push comes to shove, the state is still really where the ultimate power is. And Trump's second term is looking to be different than his first. He came to power sort of seen by many in the media as, okay, this is a one-term sideshow. We'll get great coverage. We'll make good money off of this, which they did. They hyped the controversies and made a lot of profit. Trump was very good for the bottom line for the biggest media monopolies. But this time he's coming a lot more prepared with an agenda that's laid out with the experience of having exercised presidential power. And so I think they are also getting themselves in line to make sure that they're positioned to once again reap the best profits. And the way they do that this time might look a bit different than it did in the first term.
Okay. Yeah, no. So CJ is pointing to this sort of synergy and the power of the state. Marcia, do you know? I mean, we have like a First Amendment, right? Like that's an important part of the Constitution and what it is that we're living under right now. But in the Project 2025 stuff and all of these plans that Trump has put forward for his administration, what can the state do to crack down on media at this point? I also want to remind everybody that the Supreme Court has said that it's now legal for the president to commit crimes in favor of, whatever. I didn't read this too closely. But what is it that the state can actually do to crack down on the media right now, Marcia?
Well, I mean, the media is under certain restrictions, certain regulatory restrictions, and the state can certainly work on those requirements and hopefully for them make it so it's harder to do business. The whole thing is just really almost embarrassing for those of us who've worked in media in the past. I mean, it's all about, we used to have a thing where we were doing the news in the service of the community. Now we are doing the news not in the service to the community, but in the service of our pocketbooks. And so this has deteriorated the landscape in such a way that all the big media organizations and conglomerates are really, really very vulnerable to Trump, whatever the president can do. I mean, I don't know if it's possible to, rescind licenses to broadcast stations, for instance. I mean, there are all sorts of ways that, by the way, I guess I'm going to that first most important way is lawsuits. He can drain them dry with lawsuits, just as he is just fiddled away at his own lawsuits and been very successful at it. He can do the same for media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point. Using the legal system to go after them. Now, Chauncey, I just want to get back to this whole Mark Zuckerberg thing real quick, because I know that you are publishing an article about this today. But, Zuckerberg got on television this week with, a whole new fresh look, come a long way from, his Senate hearings look, where he's sitting on the booster seat or whatever. But now he seems to be much more, feeling himself. And he's saying that he wants to get rid of content moderation on Facebook, or at least, I guess, fact checking on Facebook, and replace it with something along the lines of what Twitter has now, which is called community notes. Now, I want to point out the fact that I read a tweet this morning that said that body doubles and clones were being arrested and taken away at the Carter funeral on Twitter, and that had no community notes on it and like 1 million or something views. So I'm not sure if that's like a reliable way of determining what's true and what's not. But I also read that as part of their content moderation practices, they're going to start rolling back protections for women and LGBTQ people, that you can start to call LGBTQ people crazy or gross, or you can call women names and say that women are less intelligent, or that women need to, not have the right to vote anymore. What kind of impact does this have? I mean, this is a type of media that's used a lot by young people, also older people, but what kind of like reverberating effects do you think this might have across society if these big, quote unquote social media platforms are now saying that it's okay for you to lie or spread disinformation or attack vulnerable communities?
Well, I think it's also about understanding that in a way it's kind of smoke and mirrors what he's talking about. One, his fact checking protocol has been the fact checking protocol on Meta has been in place since 2016, and that was really in response to Facebook being held, one of the largest platforms, social media platforms, being pointed out that misinformation and things like that and hate speech and stuff like that was really prevalent on the app. And so in 2016, they put into place the fact checking protocol, where they partnered with third parties that were based in with nonprofit organizations that were fact checkers and journalists. But the thing was, even though Zuckerberg's less than 10-minute video first tried to paint the fact checkers as biased and them having lost the trust and there was too much censorship, in reality, as the fact checkers pointed out themselves online in response to his video, and Meta actually counteracts what he says if you just go on their website, because they still have the page up about what the fact checking program actually is, explains that at the end of the day, Meta itself held the cards when it came to so-called censorship, taking down hate speech and things like that. So what you have is Zuckerberg painting this picture that there was some great censorship, and that the so-called facts were were biased, and that fact checking is in and of itself bias, and that there's it's politically motivated. So the first half of his speech, his video was really kind of just trying to paint this picture that the mainstream discourse has changed and that there's a new era. And what has to be understood is you have to put in context of where this video is coming from. One, him and other I call them tech bros, but him and other tech CEOs have all donated at least $1 million or more to Trump's inauguration. Now, some of these companies have donated to other inaugurations before, but they're all lining up, like Apple, Amazon, Open Chat AI, and things like that, to Trump's inauguration. Also, Zuckerberg and these other CEOs went to Mar-a-Lago back in late November to have meetings with Trump. And I think it also goes to what was being said about the fact that you have some people cozying up because they don't want to be on Trump's bad side. But in particular to even Elon Musk, and even, and in this case, Zuckerberg, talking about censorship, and now we're going to move to Texas and all this other stuff. It's an appeal to the MAGA base, which, has this, populist tendency of like anti so-called censorship, government, things like that, and kind of feeding into this ever-present culture war that they have been pushing in the recent years. And so what you have is that they did indeed change their hate conduct policy, where they took out particular words. They no longer use the word hate speech. They use hateful conduct.
Mhm.
And this is just a way to kind of, as you were pointing out, change the rhetoric around what actually is hate speech. So yes, there are specific things that they have put in, which makes it so that if you're debating whether or not a woman should have the same job as a man, or if someone from the LGBTQ community should be able to have a job or basic rights, that you can argue that they don't based off of your belief or religion now, that's somewhat protected and whatnot. And other things that they've kind of switched around to appeal to this idea. And also with that, they've added Dana White, who is a longtime like Trump supporter, to the board of directors, and he has had his controversies with his homophobic rants, and also defending the homophobic rants of his UFC fighters, things like that. So you have that in the first half, but I think what people have to understand is that, and I even point out in the upcoming article, is that I believe Zuckerberg kind of hoped that Americans' dwindling attention span would make it so many people didn't get to the end of his video, where he really says the quiet part out loud. And the censorship that they're really trying to go against is the censorship of them forming their monopolies. What we've seen in the last couple of years has been calls from representatives and organizations alike, like Elizabeth Warren and others, calling for a breaking up of these tech monopolies, understanding that these tech companies have been going unregulated, and yet they hold so much power and influence. And what he points out in the end of his video is the fact that they're joining up with Trump to push back against this censorship. That's the censorship he's really concerned with. And it's not really censorship. What it is, it's a regulation. And he is saying that they're going to push back against all the governments of the world. And he doesn't just say it about the other countries. He names Europe, China, and Latin America, but he also means the US government, because there have been calls for regulation of the tech companies. So what you have is someone trying to build their tech empires and using the government and cozying up with the government and those that they think they can persuade to help them do that, not just only here in the United States but around the world. So at the end of the day, it's about money for them. They'll go into the culture war. They'll play that game, but a lot of that is to shore up favor so that they can do their real agenda, which is continue to build their money empire at the expense and the detriment to working people and democracy as a whole, as we've seen that what this hateful speech and hateful conduct can do to the discourse and can influence elections and things like that. To them, that's par for the course for their larger goal, and
Yeah,
that's exactly what Zuckerberg is doing.
Yeah, I like how you sort of frame it as like a smoke and mirrors thing, because also in his statement there's like an abdication of responsibility where he's like, "Oh, well, I guess that the so-called discourse has changed, the mainstream conversation about these issues has changed," as if people like him and other tech bros, because I think they're all bros. I think you're right on that. And also these, major companies haven't had like a major responsibility in actually introducing this discourse and supporting this discourse. I mean, this is the medium. It's not, people will go on social media and they'll say, "Oh, it's me, it's my words, it's my opinions," and not think that they're being influenced by like the algorithms, by the advertising that's being put next to their posts, etc. I mean, when you're posting on social media, you are creating value for these tech billionaires. It's not like it's a flat playing field. It's not like that at all. There are definitely like fingers on the scales of what's right and what's wrong. And you're correct. It all sort of leads back to pay no attention to this completely, monopoly that's forming in the background around media. Now, Marcia, you have worked in media for a very long time now. And when we were discussing this show earlier the week, you described it at the news used to be what was called a loss leader. And I was wondering if you could describe what loss leader means to our audience, and then how the news was a loss leader, because I feel like this response that like, "Oh, we're just at the mercy and whim of public opinion and stuff like that," like when they're actually at the mercy of these big corporations. If you could explain that a little bit to our audience, I think that would be very helpful.
Sure. Loss leader is actually a store, the retail industry came up with that. It's a product that they put out there that they have to put out, but they recognize that they're going to end up losing money over this product. And that's the way, way back when, in the early 70s, when I got into media, that was the attitude about news, was we are required to produce so many hours a week to serve the needs of the community. And so, okay, we'll do this news thing because it's not an outrageous overhead, and we can do it for reasonably cheap. And so that's what news was. It wasn't even, I mean, it was sort of an annoyance to some people who were owning the stations that were involved in this. Somewhere along the way, somebody figured out that with the low overhead in producing news, which it's way cheaper to produce news than to produce a sitcom or a syndicated series or anything like that, they figured out that this was a huge way to make money that they have been ignoring all along. That's what shifted in our minds between news being serving the public, and now news being a cash cow, if you will, making lots and lots of money. It really is all about profits. I said earlier it's about the money, stupid, but it's really about the profits, stupid. You know what I mean? And so it's changed our whole view. Suddenly, news people have become celebrities, and I mean, crazy celebrities. Used to be that, yeah, Walter Cronkite was really the only celebrity on the news. And again, it was because he was serving the public.
I see. Yeah, no, for sure. And it can be really intimidating because now, for instance, you have less even a response to advertisers on some of these platforms and more a response to the billionaires who are owning the platforms, right? Because you have, I mean, with the Washington Post this week, the cover of our show here is a political cartoon which shows different media billionaires basically paying homage to Donald Trump out of the frame with big sacks of money. That these are actually the people that are being appealed to. I know, for instance, with Elon Musk, when he bought Twitter, that lots and lots of advertisers pulled out of Twitter because they didn't want to have their ads seen next to really like Nazi propaganda, like the most disgusting Nazi propaganda. But now, and it's been very quiet, they've started to sort of come back to Twitter and start to advertise there, But in the meanwhile, he was able to sort of stretch things with his own personal wealth, as well as, firing lots and lots of people and cutting down on costs and stuff. But he was able to stretch this with his own personal wealth. And I have a feeling that someone like Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, this cartoon artist actually quit in protest. And there have also been lots of other people from their journalistic staff who have quit in protest as well, that he also can afford to sort of stretch things that maybe he's not as responsive to the advertisers anymore as he might otherwise be. I'm not so sure about, the big networks and stuff, but I know at least for social media that this is a concern. But CJ, so instead of us feeling really, really down about the media and all of this disinformation and hate floating around, what is it that we can do as communists, as communist journalists? How is it that we can actually push back against this tide of really horrific kind of disinformation and manipulation at the grand scale of things? How can People's World also play a role?
Sure. In journalism, there's the old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Which means that if you want to make money on the news, you're going to chase the things that supposedly are captivating public attention: the violence, the vice, the sex, the controversy. And what we're seeing, of course, with a lot of these big media companies, and talking about social media in particular right now, is they're sort of following that model, right? There's this perception, and Zuckerberg stated it, that the mainstream mindsets are changing. And we have to keep in mind that they make their profits, through a couple of ways: advertising and capturing and reselling our data about how we use media. And so they're going to chase this formula. If they think that the MAGA political ideology is what's popular, then that's where the profits are, and they're going to chase it. But what we do at People's World is that we challenge this sort of race to the lowest common denominator, right? We don't just cater to what we think are the most base sort of ideas and controversies. Yes, we address and we cover the class struggle, economic struggle, political struggle, but we do it from the standpoint of trying to advance people's interests and to build unity, not to sow division and profit from it. So at People's World, what you're going to see in our pages every day is exposés of these kind of forces and these kind of people like Zuckerberg, like Trump, like Bezos, like Elon Musk. And you're going to see us covering what people on the ground are doing to build their own ability to resist them. So something that we're going to be working on at People's World in the upcoming year is a relaunch of our website, which is now several years old. But we want to be as prepared as we can to cover the people's news, bring the best analysis, and get it out there in an accessible way that is in touch with the technology of the times. You know, we want to have better and more video content. We want to have shows like Good Morning Revolution that are easy for people to come and find and search the topics they want to see. We want to have podcasts and all of this variety of forms. So we're going to be focusing our 2025 Fund Drive campaign around preparing for that new website design. And you'll be hearing from us in the coming months about, addressing our readers, appealing to them to find out what they want to see and what we can do better. So I think that's what makes us unique in this moment is we're not chasing division, we're chasing unity.
I love that. I love that framing. And I'm also really excited, like Justin, to see the new relaunch of the website. But I want to do a quick round robin and ask Marcia and Chauncey, what do you think we can do to also push back against this kind of, conglomeration of the media, the profit chasing, and this disinformation? Marcia, what do you think?
It's a really difficult position that we're all in now. I want to take it down to the level of you and me and my next door neighbor and the other people who live down the streets. We need to be actively involved in critically receiving the media that's out there. We have to get off our couches where we've been sitting for the last time, letting other people do the work of fact checking and do fact checking on our own. The idea of asking somebody who produced this message, that's the very first question you want to ask when you're looking at somebody, something, a message of some sort. You want to say who's the source. And with a lot of the AI stuff and the misinformation, we don't know who the source is. So if we can't identify who the source is, we need to turn it off. And I know that a lot of people think, well, it's just too hard to do that. No, it's not hard at all. If you see something important to you in terms of a news story that you are really interested in and can't believe that this is happening or whatever, you should stop for a moment. It could only take maybe 10 minutes for you to figure out who the message is from. The other thing is, look at all levels of the message. You look at the layers, the obvious message that's delivered, but what's that undertone? What's that subterranean message that they're trying to get across? That's a really important thing that we need to be looking at. Look for the subtopics that are implied in the message and question them. It is a problem of accepting responsibility for being misled and doing something about it on the individual level.
Yeah, no, it would be great if we could bring media literacy back as like a topic that people are interested in, and also cui bono. Who benefits from this message? Who benefits from, the end of content moderation or the spreading of hate speech, etc. But Chauncey, I want to give you the last word and ask, what is it that you think that our viewers that we can do to try and push back against this type of media narrative?
Well, I think it's important to know. Media literacy and things like that are really good. But I think it's also good to know larger movements are happening, what larger actions are taking place. One of the things that I mentioned in the article, the upcoming article, and we've mentioned before, is that there have been calls for regulating tech companies. There have been calls for having more transparency when it comes to the algorithms and things like that. Because yes, we can fact check and we can try to be diligent on that, but there is, as we always look at, this systemic issue that is going to take a bit more of a unifying approach in how we go about making sure that these platforms are held accountable and that the owners of the platforms are held accountable. And I think that comes from calling for things like the for regulation, uh, demanding more transparency with this almighty algorithm that basically gets to decide what's put in front of people on their timeline and how that is worked out when it comes to them trying to get you to keep your eyeballs on it longer for their advertisement and things like that. So I think it's really about also understanding how these things work. I mean, I think for so long the tech bros have been able to hide behind the fact that they kind of made it seem like this is this tech thing that you don't know about and we're just kind of facilitating it for you. But it's really, I always think that when people understand how something works, they can understand how to make it work better. And if we don't understand how it works because they're not being transparent and because they're holding all the cards, that doesn't help us. And as someone who actually, I applied for the community notes program on X and I got in. I applied for it like a year ago and then somehow I was approved. And the way the community notes things works, you're kind of like a drop in the ocean. Someone makes a community note. It has to be these specific people who are in the community notes program. And then you can try to do some fact checking to, make it so, but then it gets voted on. So if enough of those people in community notes don't agree, it's just kind of a free for all, which is what Zuckerberg wants as well on Facebook. So I think it has to be more so a systemic approach of dealing with how these platforms are allowed to function. And I would also say, support local journalism and support independent journalism. I mean, People's World is an example of that for sure. And there's others that are out there that you're really pushing for reporting in a way that's in the interest of the readership and in an empowering way, not just stoking fear and kind of this passive way of knowing about things, but not knowing what to do about them. So I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, this has been such an incredibly rich discussion, and I just really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I feel like we could continue this conversation. The local media part, we barely touched on that, but that is something that is so critical to a functioning democracy, is knowing what the heck is going on down the street from where you live. I mean, you meet people all the time who are so concerned about an issue that seems so completely far removed from their lives. Meanwhile, they're drinking poison in their water, or there is a factory that has, been spewing poison in the air, or there have been mass layoffs of a local company, and people just don't even know that this is going on because of this conglomeration, because of this profit chasing. So I really appreciate what everybody said about how we can push back on it, because it kind of represents like a full spectrum approach, right? Like we've got the dealing with it at the systemic level in challenging, transparency and regulating these out of control, interests. And then also, focusing on media literacy. I mean, this is something that they teach in school in Cuba. They teach people how to become critical receivers of information. And we can see now with the education system as it is, that there's a lot of fighting that needs to be done, not just on that front, but on a lot of other fronts as well when it comes to discerning what reality is. And then I also think, the People's World, that I'm really genuinely looking forward to the relaunch of the website. I think it needs to be a larger voice. And I think it needs to reach more people. And I think that all of us as comrades have a responsibility in making sure that that can happen, that we can grow this out and do battle against capitalism on all these different fronts. So once again, I just really want to thank everybody for joining us today. Chauncey having to deal with the fires. CJ, I hope that you're feeling better. Marcia, with the snow outside in Alabama, but we just really appreciate it. And I just want to thank you all again from me and also our viewers. So until next week, we would encourage you to please stay strong, stay safe, stay in the fight, and read People's World and spread it around as much as possible. So looking forward